Hey man, want to make less money?
I'm the founder of a company. There's no way you can pay me less money than what I'm making now.
Welcome to another episode of Horses with Horns. My name is Indranil,
I'm Nicholas.
and today we're going to talk about trying to find your first few employees. Surprising we haven't talked about this before yet, but we're finally going to talk about hiring. You have an idea, you may or may not have a co-founder, but you've decided that you want to start thinking about making those early hires. Who are you looking for? How do you find them? How do you get them to join you, considering a lot of them are probably going to be making a lot less at that early stage company? So we work together at not just an early stage company, but one that actually helped other companies with their hiring.
Mm-hmm.
So let's get into it. Let's talk about that.
Sure. Well, hiring is always a big commitment, right? Because I think I said this maybe in the first episode or in the first couple episodes. You're taking a lot of uncertainty and you're making a bet on someone to say, okay, I want you to work on this while I figure out the rest of the business, right? Because you've gotten to the conclusion that you need someone to work on that, or you need someone with this job description to work on this, right? And up to this point, right, the founders of the company, they've dealt with a significant amount of change, and no day is similar as the day before as they try to figure out, and the business pivots and so many changes, right? But once you bring someone that is in a much more, let's call it a transactional relationship, that doesn't go with employees anymore, right? So it's a difficult decision, and I think it's not an easy one to make.
Yeah, and I think one of the things is, as we talked about in the co-founder episode a few weeks ago, even just bringing on that first person who is going to be super bought in is now trusting them that they're going to do a good job. They're going to take on stuff that you formerly thought that you could do better. And now you're trying to get people who probably, even though early stage, maybe they have a good amount of equity, but you know, they're not the founders. They're not as bought in no matter what. And you're still going to have to trust them to take on very important tasks.
Yeah, I mean, but the first thing that I would ask, and hopefully I don't have too much of a bias because I run a consulting company, but why hire? Why not outsource? Why not pay for the project? Why not give it to a consulting company to do?
Personally, I think it is actually the buy-in aspect. I think, especially if this is something that you're going to need more than once. Like, it's not setting up a new vendor or tool for your company. This is a functional area you're going to keep using. I really think the biggest buy-in you can get is getting somebody on board, and I'm also a big advocate for giving everyone equity.
Mm-hmm. Well, I don't know if that's necessarily the case with how I think of it, I guess. I see hiring much more transactionally.
Mm-hmm.
And at least so far, the way that I've done it has been much more on a contractor basis too. So not really hiring per se. So I see it more of you come in, you do this job, and I compensate you on an hourly basis for the job and call it a day. And hopefully we work together for a long time. I see much more of a working together than, join the company or anything like that. And personally, me, myself, I haven't hit that stage yet. And just on principle, I think your first hires should be whatever position they're in, it should justify selling more, in my opinion.
But tell me more. What does that mean to you?
Because just financially, right, you are adding a certainty on the cost side. So you need to balance that out with a somewhat of a certainty on the revenue side.
That makes sense, yeah. So one of the big things with even making the decision of contractor versus employee is kind of going back to the point of, is this a one-off thing, or do I need this person for something longer term? And I think you're right. If you've decided that, no, okay, I need this person, well, now you have to be able to pay that person's salary. That's your responsibility.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I I think when you get someone on a full-time capacity, just to me, it makes more sense to hire someone full-time where you like how they work more than on the job description itself. Because I think when you hire someone full-time, you hire for skills, intellect, and not for tasks, in my opinion. Because if you have a very defined task, then that should be paid on an hourly basis, you know?
Yeah.
Or on a delivery basis, at least.
I agree. And we can talk about this in a little bit on what these early stage hires do and how they're often not even the job description, like if there is even a job description at this stage. But let's talk a little bit more about how you determine when it's time to hire. Like let's even assume that you have a co-founder, so you have somebody who's already offsetting what you do. What's the next step? Like how do you find that first person that is a non-founder employee?
Yeah. Well, I think the trigger for that is, in my perspective, like I said before, the only thing that can justify that in the early days is selling more. I don't know if that looks like a sales rep necessarily or some other kind of position, but something that if you say, oh, if I bring someone to take care of these activities, then the company will be able to sell more.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I think in the early days, of course, the founders, regardless of what their general focus area is, they are selling. Like every founder is always pitching. But your next hire after that, I think, is actually still continuing the trend of let's offset something. Hey, I've been doing something now as a founder for some amount of time. I may not be the best person for this. And because we've increased sales or have funding or whatever, I can now justify bringing somebody who, as you mentioned, has skills, has that skill set to take on this thing that I probably shouldn't do forever.
Yeah, sales process must be very well defined, I think, by the time that you start hiring people. Even if you don't hire sales reps necessarily, if you're hired for a different capacity, I think that, sales must be figured out, whatever that looks like.
I think it probably depends a little bit on the type of company, though. Again, like a pure software company, you may find that that's not the case because your first few hires might actually just be more engineers. Like you might not be selling anything. Well, I'll take that back because I think you should always be selling. And at that early stage, even the MVP, you're still selling your MVP.
But see, for MVP, I don't know if I would hire. I think I would outsource.
Somewhere between that. Somewhere between MVP and finding PMF, product market fit.
Right. Yeah. Tricky, right? And again, me, myself, I've not lived through it. I don't know for sure. I do know that when you work with, contractors, the degree of commitment it's lower for sure. And that can be problematic.
Yeah. And we found that both at the early stages as well as later on when the thing is more developed. I've also worked with some really amazing contractors who do a really good job and are pretty much indistinguishable from any other employee.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, a lot of it has to do with contractors, just a legal term, right? Ultimately, right. You can treat your contractors as full-time employees or you can treat them as contractors.
Again, not legally, but I get what you're saying.
Yeah. Yeah, there's technically a very well-defined list of things that someone needs to do to be considered a contractor.
Yes, especially in California.
Well, the other thing that I would say is I think your first hires, because the company will go through changes still, I think especially at that early stage, that you want, I think, some of the features that you'll be looking for is much more centered on full stackness, and not just full stack in the sense of a particular position, but as full stack of an employee as you can be, because the company can go in different directions early on.
Right. Where, like thinking back to InterviewJet, I was kind of hired as a generalist intern. And then I remember my very first week, we were setting up Salesforce dashboards out of the box. Then after that, I set up Bill.com. And then I also started doing recruiting. Yeah, you kind of do everything.
Yeah, and that actually goes to another point, which I think companies do differently. Should your first hire be someone really senior or really junior?
That is a deep philosophical question, and I think both can work. My preference across the board for hiring is to hire someone roughly one step below what you think you need, unless you need them to lead a function. At that point, like if you can afford to and you need them to lead a full function, then I think you should actually just hire someone at that level, if not even a little overqualified.
I think if you go with senior, you should hire someone that's not afraid to do let's call it the manual work, getting in the mud and, just getting dirty with the work and not necessarily thinking of strategizing it and then giving to someone else.
I think that's the case across roles until probably Series D almost. Like even a Series C VP is going to be hopefully not forever in the weeds, but at the very start, like you might be hired as a VP to be in the weeds for a few months, then build your team.
Well, yeah, but at the Series C point, you're definitely not the first hire, right?
No, at that point you're probably several hundred employees deep.
Yeah. Different scenario, I think.
Yeah.
What I would say though,
early stage, you also probably shouldn't have VPs. If you have VPs at that level, that's just a title. It doesn't mean anything.
Remember when we gave ourselves titles? Yeah, I mean, that's also, I don't know if that's good practice, looking back on it. I don't know if you should give yourself a title or you can just choose whatever you want.
Or the de facto head of just
head
means
of something.
Yeah, head of because I'm the only one.
Yeah. So if you go with senior, go with someone that's not afraid, I think, of, getting in the weeds of it and really doing the work in the most archaic way possible if needed. The other thing that I would say, though, if you hire junior, then I would say, number one, just have the awareness of the amount of mentorship, I guess, or the amount of guidance that you have to provide. It's much more than you may realize. And I think the other feature that you should look for is something similar where with junior people, you're going to have the problem that, okay, you've never seen this problem before. You've never gone through this situation in the past, but you'll do something to figure it out.
Yeah, so I think that kind of goes to a growth mindset because I actually go back and forth on that problem of do you need somebody who's done it before or not? And the common thing that gets thrown around in startup world is, oh, well, this is the first time we're doing it. We have no idea. There's no backing data for this. You'll find in a lot of functions that that's not actually true. Like, especially in a marketplace business, sure, there are things unique to your marketplace, but it's not that there aren't learnings you can take from another one. Like somebody has faced something pretty similar to what you've done.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Also consider the fact that, when there's a lot that you can learn and you can just research and find out. And I think that's a good learning early on in your career that you can figure things out, and that.
Or I think that's probably even actually the benefit of nobody's done this before. Well, it's no constrained playbook. Then you can figure it out how you want to.
Exactly. You may end up doing it. You may be, reinventing the wheel, and someone may have figured out some kind of standard way to go about it.
Someone gets there like a couple days before you did.
Right, but you're going to get that with senior talent, right? People that have seen the problem before, and I think ideally you have a mix, right? I actually posted on LinkedIn about this recently. I forget his name now; it escapes me, but and I've said this on many episodes before. I listen to a lot of jazz, and one of the main figures in jazz and in music is Miles Davis, and he reinvented many music styles and created brand new ones. He's the first one to introduce electric instruments in jazz and things like that, creating fusion. And the way that he went about basically mixing jazz and rock for the first time, no one had done it before, not formally, was by bringing a good mixture of experience, inexperience, jazz and rock, and ultimately you want to have these very experienced jazz musicians with these adventurous rock young musicians in the same place, and that mix ultimately gives you the best of both worlds, I guess.
Actually, yeah, I think that makes sense. Where if you only have senior people, then you have one potential for ego, but even more than that, you have a bunch of people who have done things before, and then they feel constrained to try that same thing again, which may not work for that business. If you only have junior people, whereas you might get some new way to do something that may actually end up being better, you will probably take a little longer to get to the answer, whereas somebody who's done it a few times before, even if it's not the best fit for your business, at least it'll be done.
Yeah, but with the junior people, there's a lot more hand-holding than expected, I think.
Usually. And I also think, startups especially will often skimp on the mentorship. They'll say, oh, well, we don't have time. We just need to find somebody who will figure it out. And I personally have learned by doing so. I don't hate that approach, but I do think it's your responsibility to mentor the junior people too.
Yeah, if you figure out, because, okay, yeah, you could find someone junior that's quick and picks things up quickly and has the drive and whatever, right? But I think a lot of people are just, when you compare the education, college, say, and work, there is a shock. There is a gap between learning something and doing something. So I think if you stand at that gap, you can bring a lot of talent out of junior people, for sure.
For sure.
And I think the some of the best work that you can give junior people at first is something that you've done, that you've already operationalized in some way, and you just teach, right? But then you have to figure out, I think, how to transition the teaching into, okay, this is what I figured out, keep working on this. But over time, you're going to have to figure out things that you need to bring up to me, Yeah. When I used to manage, I think, a good amount of interns on my previous job, and over time, over interviewing and whatnot, I kind of developed this line, which sounded good, but it was also very accurate, which was, I know what I want, and what I want is this, but I'm ultimately hiring you for you to tell me what I need. And that's something that you have to realize over time. I don't expect it day one, right? But as I give you what I figured out, I'm busy with other things, right? So, but I'm giving you this task, right? And a lot has to do with delegation, right? Because now when you hire someone, especially on the junior side, you're adding work to, you're putting more on the management plate.
Right. I think one of the things that especially a newer manager has to realize is you take the task off your plate, but now you've added mentorship, you've added checking over work, and kind of like developing the person to help them get to answers more quickly. And that is both a big responsibility and actually more work than some people realize. Yeah,
I've seen many people fail at it. I've seen many people not handle junior talent very well.
I'd go as far as saying most people are bad managers, and it's something that I am not even close to perfect at.
Yeah, and this is not singling out specific people, but managing is really hard. And managing junior people is harder. It's cheap.
Yeah.
But it cost is on different areas of the company, time and things like that.
Yeah. So I think similar in what is difficult about managing people is, well, of course, first you have to actually convince somebody to join your company. So I've talked with a lot of recruiting friends about how recruiting is essentially one of the hardest sales that there is, because you're convincing somebody to give up their time. And especially at an early stage company, you're asking somebody to not only give you their time, but for probably less money than they're making right now. So what are some of those challenges and some of the ways that you've overcome when you're hiring?
Well, I've done it, as I said, with contractors, and that in most cases implies that they have a full-time job and I'm offering them something to do off hours. That will probably most likely will be a higher per hour than they're making in their full-time jobs. But the pitch that I've used is to find something that I've noticed that a lot of people that even are interested in hearing about you are interested in doing something else. They're interested in, if they're considering working when they're done working, then it's because they have a certain ambition, certain hunger, right? So I think definitely what they want to see, and what I've noticed is, okay, are you going to give me work that is different from what I'm doing and that is more exciting, more interesting, newer? And I think a lot of people just don't want to do more of the same. So presenting the work that you can give to them in a unique light, I think that's the best thing that I've been able to see work.
Yeah, I agree. I think, and very much like in any other sales process, if somebody's even willing to talk to you, whether it was inbound or outbound, there might be some interest there. This is somebody that you can talk to, and you have to do the discovery work. It's not just about pitching them on the role and saying, this is why you should join my company. But I think it's always about understanding their goals. What do they want out of this next role? And how can this opportunity help them, even if they're going to be paid less?
Yeah, the main thing I think is, especially the early hires, let's say they're hiring somewhat senior, not all the way senior maybe, but I think some of the early hires at a startup should be people that you see or they told you that at some point they would like to start their own companies.
Yep.
Because I think you're going to need that kind of, at least that desire. And now people say that a lot without necessarily knowing what it means. And in fact, most people that say that until they do it realize that it's a whole different experience. But at least these are people that are saying, I have some curiosity about this, right? So they have a goal for themselves. You're giving them an opportunity to explore the goal without necessarily committing to it. So somewhat of a guarantee there, I think.
Yeah. Also want to do one quick caveat there. We're talking very much about early stage companies and how you might make less, and you're usually hopefully compensated in the form of equity, which long term could make you much, much more money. I will say that as you raise more money, as companies grow and either have more funding or more sales, the divide between private startups and maybe other bigger companies is much less than people would think.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you're actually paid pretty well at a Series B plus company. So
yeah, I personally have
and
a
the
lot
risk
of
is also lower than you might think.
Yeah, I have a lot of problems with the word startup when it comes to a company of one and a company of 300 employees.
Right.
You can't use the same word. Like, those two are not startups. Choose.
It's high growth, but
Yeah.
you feel pretty good with $30 million in the bank.
Yeah, in fact, the most corporate experience I've ever had in my life was at a company that says they're a startup. The most corporate experience. So, yeah, not at all. But yeah, there's a lot of new things, especially when you hire for the first time, right? Because you're going from a team of founders that's used to dealing with things in a very messy kind of way. But then when you make the first hire, and now it's much more transactional, everything, there's a job description, everything has to be defined now. And you, as the founder, also have to check yourself to make sure, okay, I cannot put founder expectations on someone who's not a founder, right? This person's here to do a job.
We could probably have a full episode on that, on the qualities that you need to look for in those first, say, 10 to 20 employees, because I agree. I think we shouldn't sugarcoat things. Jobs are jobs. They are kind of inherently transactional, where past the founding team, yes, absolutely, you want people bought in. You want them to really care about the mission and vision. Those are going to be your best hires.
Mm-hmm.
But ultimately, it is just a job. Like, they want to be able to go home after the day and not necessarily think about the business.
Yeah, I agree that it is just a job, but I think on the hiring end, as the founder making that hire, you should at least say, okay, I know you're here for the money. I know you're here for a paycheck, but why my paycheck? At
Right.
least give me a good reason why you want this one and not just anyone.
And also with the phrasing of my paycheck, it is because that money literally came out of the founder's pocket.
Oh, yeah.
Because that
Exactly.
founder, that is the least money he's making for the most work they've ever done.
Yeah, it is. That's how it is. It's also money, right? Like I said earlier, right? You're putting a guarantee on cost. Your company, you've added guarantee cost.
Right. Which is where you have to be careful with the expectation that even your early hires are not going to worry about the business as much as you. If they are worrying more than you, then you have to look at yourself at a founder and really think, is this the business for me?
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, of course, you need them to be bought in. And I think this is part of how you convince those early hires to join you is that, yes, you're offering them a new experience, offering them a possibly super innovative product and something cool, but also that there's a mission and vision behind this with growth potential beyond just what the paycheck is today.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Agreed.
Because it's honestly never enough. Like, you could make tons and tons of money. If you don't like the work, then we've seen that many times. People don't stay, even if the money's good.
Yeah, and I've had many people in the past question why don't you have a preference for equity? Why just a salary? And I think from an employee perspective, I think it's easier for me to think of a company as where I come in and I do a job and I do it well as best as I can. And hopefully I get fairly compensated for that. But I also personally, and it's something that I had before and I have it, I think probably even more now as a founder, I personally have a strong sense of, I feel guilty if I get money knowing that the company's not making money or not being able to connect my work with revenue. It's not just guilty, but it makes me feel like, what is the sense in hiring me? What is the sense in doing me? Should I suggest, should I volunteer myself to be laid off?
It's good ownership mentality there, though.
Yeah, thanks. But, it's, and maybe because I have that way of thinking about a job, it's also the way that I would hire. To say, going back to what I said earlier, like it has to be justified in sales, at least in the beginning.
Yeah, I feel like I actually take a similar approach when I hire. I'm very, very clear with people that I interview and eventually hire that I'm totally fine with you thinking that this is just a job. I want you to care about the company. I want you to be bought in and to care about more than just the paycheck.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, like, I understand that the paycheck is also important and that you're not going to care about it as much as the founding team. And that's fine.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. So with that, actually, I think I want to hear from Hunter. Hunter is a really good friend, not just at the podcast, but ours personally. Nicholas, Hunter, and I have worked together once at our very first company. I actually worked with her again at my second company. We've also done some projects on the side together in the past. Yeah, really excited to hear from her.
Hey there, my name is Hunter. I'm currently the Director of Product Operations at Rhino, a real estate and insurtech startup. I'm a generalist operator with experience at early stage and scaling startups, and I've had the unique privilege and challenge of working both with early stage founders or early stage hires that were establishing and scaling their teams, startup talent looking for their next opportunity, as well as personally being an early hire and growing and mentoring my own teams. I was talking to my good friend Indy a little bit about startup hiring in general, and between ourselves, when is the right time to actually start scaling a team beyond yourself? What are the challenges associated with those first couple of hires? And then how do you actually convince people to take the opportunity, right? To close them and get them to join your team. So, with the first sort of question there, I think hiring the wrong team is just one of the biggest reasons for startup failure in general. But even on a more, micro scale, it's it can be a huge source of frustration for you, even if you're not a founder. So, in my personal experience, I've been an early hire at companies where I'm brought in to learn a new function or establish a new function, and then at a certain point I've got to scale that beyond myself. And it's not that there's necessarily a time frame where you need to make that first hire. Sometimes it's a couple of months, sometimes it's a lot longer than a couple of months, but for me it's always been you either lack key skills or knowledge to move forward and keep momentum, or you start to miss out on higher impact opportunities because of your personal time constraints, right? When I worked at AngelList or at InterviewJet, it was the same story with a lot of the early stage founders that I worked with, or early hires at startups that were now scaling their own teams. They'd gotten to a point where they knew the ins and outs of their new function, but they were starting to miss out on opportunities. They couldn't grow as quickly because they were really limited by their own time constraints. So they had become bottlenecks, so to speak, whether that was in knowledge, whether that was in skills, or whether that was in time. So for me, I would say, you're ready to hire once you start having to say no to opportunities that you really want to say yes to. That's probably the right time to start thinking about bringing on someone to delegate some of those tasks to. In terms of the challenges of hiring your first few employees, I mean, there's quite a few of them, right? Every startup is a little bit different. I would always say capital is probably one of those challenges. How do you attract high quality talent in a competitive marketplace when you have limited capital? But beyond that, I kind of want to dive into another sort of universal trait, which is trust. I know for myself personally, it can be very difficult to sort of balance the opportunity cost, right? Why hire this out? Why delegate this out when I can do it myself? And so it goes back to sort of that first point, which is you start to miss out on opportunities you really want to take advantage of because of your personal time constraints or because of your skill constraints or knowledge constraints. Trust is really hard. I think the best way around it is you just have to try. It's through, right? Not every hire is going to be an amazing hire, but I think if you can focus on certain qualities, especially for your first couple of hires, it will really mitigate the risk involved with trust and misplacing your trust in the wrong kind of person. So one is setting up some good indicators. How do you know that the work that someone is doing is impacting the right metrics? And having a clear sense. You don't have to have a lot of them, but just having a clear sense of what does success look like and what should that be resulting in. It's really important to make sure that, especially with your first hire, your first couple of hires, you're not just hiring busybodies, people that look busy or create a lot of froth is what I call it around their work, but the impact is not felt. So taking a moment to kind of align either with yourself, your other founders, or other people in your team, other stakeholders, what would be important by bringing on this person? What are we hoping to unlock? What are we hoping to achieve? The second kind of way around that is hiring people who display a strong sense of curiosity. For myself personally, I am always willing to hire someone who doesn't quite know what it is I need them to do, but has an attitude where they're absolutely willing to learn. It's been my experience that it's really difficult to teach curiosity to someone. I'm not even sure that you can do that. And so folks that have this sort of, I don't know, but I can figure it out quality, I want to say works probably 90% of the time, especially for a lot of these early stage opportunities where there's just so much shit happening. The world is your oyster in a way. It's like, hey, if you notice a problem, just jump in. Don't ask for permission. Get on Google, figure it out, ask someone, reach out, network, YouTube it, Reddit it. And so that curiosity, there's a really good question I like to ask around that, which is like, what's the last thing you've taught yourself? It doesn't have to be work related. It can be outside of work. It's a favorite interview question I like to ask, and I think it's really telling, sort of the answers that people come up with and their kind of mindset and how they think about learning, and whether or not they see it as something they did back in college if they went, or if they see it as more of a continuous thing, that there's opportunity to learn and discover really at any moment of every day. And then lastly, how do you convince early hires to join you? So, I've worked at capital constrained companies for the majority of my career. We try to be capital efficient. We don't want to waste money. And then also my experience working with folks that are growing their own teams is really that you probably can't convince people with a number. Your number probably sucks. It's not the highest number that they're going to get. Your growth projections are probably overly optimistic. And then statistically speaking, whoever it is that you're courting might probably be better off working for a more mature startup or company. That doesn't have to be an ender, right? I think what's really important is don't forget the culture, hire for passion and ability to learn. And then this last one, which, always astounded me, how many hiring managers I was working with, whether they were a founder or an early hire or whatnot, failed to ask the talent that they're courting why they were even looking at all. Now, for some people, they might say, I reached out to them, so I'm not sure that they were looking in the first place. And I say, you can always ask, why'd you take this call? Why didn't you just tell me to screw off, right? There's something that compelled them to take the call, and that's your opportunity to drill down into it and sell to it. You're closing on it. On the flip side, when I worked with talent, a lot of them would say that their main motivator, wasn't a higher paycheck. They really wanted to feel less like a cog in the machine and have greater access and opportunity to either workplace environments where, again, world is their oyster, that they weren't going to be told, no, that's not your swim lane or that's above your pay grade to solve. These are people that are interested in rooting out the problems and solving them. And so their main motivator was, can I just work with some nice people? Are we going to vibe? Are we going to get along? Is there an excitement around problem solving? Can we band together? And then more importantly, am I going to be given the space to actually go and do and explore? It's not that difficult, right? And so don't lose that. And then the last one is, nail your pitch. Some people really fail to strike that balance or that combination of both the reality of today with the potential of tomorrow. You go too much in either way, and you can either scare off someone or set the wrong expectations. And so sometimes, I'm a fan of trying to sell someone off of the opportunity. It gives them an opportunity to say, what, actually, this is not the right fit for me, and that would be okay. But every time I've sold someone off of an opportunity, the folks that I end up hiring are the ones that are like, what? No, that still sounds really, really good. Here's why you should hire me. Here's why I'm interested. It's a really interesting tension point, or like a push and pull during the conversation, that can reveal a lot about the motivations of the person that you're courting or trying to bring on board. Anyways, I hope this was helpful. Thanks.
Hunter, thank you so much. That was super insightful. I feel like that kind of summed up what we took half an hour to talk about in a much shorter amount of time.
Hey, Hunter, what's up? One of the things that she said, I kind of said earlier too, but I really like the way that she phrased it, is the question why, right? Why are you talking to me right now? Why here? I think it's a good question. In a way, it's the reason why I think a lot of companies ask you for a cover letter, which on the applicant side, it's super annoying, right? But on the hiring manager side, I think it's better. I mean, maybe the cover letter is something that you don't get to know until you interview someone, right? But it's kind of necessary. Like, why here? What? Tell me something that I don't see in your resume. Tell me something more about why you're even applying here.
Yeah, I think to try and reconcile some of the stuff that I've been trying to say, while you as the hiring manager have to reconcile the fact that this could just be a job to a person, chances are, especially early stage, they're taking that call because they do see something more than that. Like it's probably not the money. It's probably not just the success of your company thus far. It's that they see something more in the mission and vision. They see an interesting new product, a new work line, or something that has stood out to them beyond the money and beyond the fact that it's a job.
Right. That is true. The other thing that she said that I really liked is the opportunities. You know, once you feel like you're missing the opportunities, that's probably a good time to hire. When there's things you'd like to do, but you just don't have the time to do them. I would like those things to do to be revenue driven and not, I really would like to build a second product. No, I really would like to work with this client. I just don't have any more time. That, to me, that sounds like a better reason to make those initial hires.
You have to earn your hires.
Yeah. You know, especially early. Like, I don't know. Maybe I'm too much of the mindset of the reason why you hire someone full time is, again, much more on intellect, skills, something that someone has, and you don't necessarily know how you're going to use it or exactly what that's going to look like on a day-to-day, but you know that something will come out of that for your benefit. If you do know what you want and what you need done, I would say try to figure out a way to operationalize it. Hire junior talent if you have to, or outsource it, give it to some other third-party company maybe.
Yeah. I think to kind of wrap up, one, take a chance on junior talent. It works out more often than you might think, but also do right by them. Make sure to mentor them. Don't say you don't have the time. And just set your expectations accordingly. You're not going to make every hire out there. A lot of people will say no, just like in any other type of a sale. But go out there, sell your company, always be pitching and really clarify that pitch, and find people that care about what you're working on.
Sounds good. Junior talent, go.